public comment on the fire EMS. We have Frank Sauter.
Thanks for giving me a few minutes to speak. You know, it's 3 minutes.
Well, you're wasting your 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thanks again, folks. Just a simple statement there. I'm Frank Sauter. I grew up here in the township for over 60 years. It's been a month or so since the last town board meeting. I hope that the board has reconsidered the fire and EMS contract with the Village of Palmyra, as without a doubt it would provide the best response times for our constituents. We have always worked with the village, and this would continue to be the best avenue for the Palmyra community as a whole. Other communities such as Whitewater and surrounding communities have similar problems with manpower and financing, which I'm sure you're aware of. Please work with the village, get this settled, and let's move forward as a community. It only makes good sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Ariane Blaskowski. That's you, we know.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Well, first of all, I'm going to take part of my 3 minutes and ask you, why do we have these meetings in a cold garage when we have a community room available to us at the high school? Is there, am I missing something here? But anyways, I'm sure you're aware of my open letter that I wrote to the town board and henceforth put into the Enterprise and the Jefferson Union, and I have nothing but positive things to say about our fire and EMS department. And to reiterate on Frank's statement, I certainly do hope that you folks will get into negotiation mode and try to amicably settle this contract and keep it. There's no reason in my mind to change it, especially considering the situation that I personally was in on January 5th. And had somebody been coming from Sullivan or Eagle or Rome, I would have had to wait extra minutes, as stated in my letter. And it's very disappointing to have that thought that this may go away. And what I'm asking you folks to do is to take the upper hand and the adult step, and let's just get this settled, and like Frank said, let's move on.
Thank you. Dawn, you done? Yep. Dawn Sauter.
My name is Dawn Sauter, and I am a town resident. I saw the articles recently posted on the town website, and if these articles were intended to answer any of my questions I submitted to the town board Fire EMS Committee on December 18th of 21, they fell short. I asked various questions, one being, what is the ISO rating of each of your other options? The response I received on December 28th of 21 was, at this point, the committee has not gathered all the information you requested. And as of this date, I still have not received any answers to my questions. The Fire EMS Committee was formed on May 10th of 21. There have been numerous closed session meetings. No information regarding the Fire EMS contract was relayed to the constituency from April of 21 to December of 21. And now we find out the contract with the village was not renewed by the town board. This leads me to believe that the committee did not do their research very well in regards to ISO ratings of fire departments, or you would have known you were putting us constituents in harm's way by not agreeing to renew the contract with the village. There is a big difference between having full-time, on-site paid personnel such as Palmyra versus having to wait for volunteer fire EMS personnel in an emergency. I cannot comprehend why anyone would not want the best service and fastest response times you could receive in an emergency. But I value my life and property to want this. If you remotely care about us constituents, it's time the town stop playing games with the village and sign the new fire EMS contract with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Down in Tronca.
I just wanted to give you some of the reasons that I think the Palmyra Town Board should sign the 2022 Fire and EMS agreement with the village. They provide a very high standard of service. Cross-training is one of those services that we cannot do without. The Palmyra Safety Department has several cross-trained employees. Cross-training not only has the potential for lowering response times and providing better outcomes, but it also for decreasing the need and expense for additional non-cross-trained staffings. Not all departments in our area have this benefit. They provide specialty equipment for servicing the town. The town does not have a high-volume water supply, and tankers have to be used to bring water to fight fires. Certain areas of the town require a brush buggy to effectively fight a fire. This equipment is not required to service the village. They have full-time, paid, and paid-on-call staffing. This speaks to the ability to provide fast response times. When departments depend on volunteers, response times are longer. There's a close geographic proximity which provides for not only favorable response times, but also for favorable ISO ratings, which is very important to homeowners insurance. That's based on, in part, on the ISO rating. A strictly cost-based decision by the town board has the potential to raise and severely impact the cost of insurance for homeowners. Palmyra has a favorable ISO rating. There are other benefits to the community connection that we have with this public safety department. It's an integral part of our community, the town and the village. Recently, a town resident back there was experiencing early stages of heart attack. Not only did she have a good response time, as she mentioned to you, but the 2 officers came back and shoveled her drive because her husband had had an injury and he wasn't able to do that. They also came back later and did a welfare check to make sure everything was okay. I do not believe that contracting with a department in a different community would have delivered these kinds of results. Palmyra has a proven track record. The cost of the agreement, do I have time left? The cost of the agreement. The town Fire and EMS committee poses to pay for the service based on 30% call volume from the previous year, but would still expect the department to be at the ready 100% of the time. The committee has also talked about equating the cost on a per capita basis. These criteria do not relate to the value of the property to be protected, both real and personal. A more realistic way to allocate the cost of this agreement is by using an equalized value formula. That is what is used by the Department of Revenue to determine the taxable value of each municipality. The equalized value of the town is 43% higher than that of the village. However, under the proposed village agreement, village cost for these services is and will remain higher than that of the town. The agreement proposed by the village is fair and equitable and should be signed by the town in the interest of providing the best, not the cheapest protection for town residents. Thank you.
Sean Kimmer.
I just want to reiterate what every other person here said before me. I hope that the board here is doing due diligence in researching the various options we have with fire and EMS service. But I hope you come to your senses and realize that you have more than just a fiduciary responsibility to see that our tax dollars are spent wisely. You've got a responsibility to the people that you serve as your neighbors, that we have the services that we want and that we need. And this is not just a matter of $58 or $150 on our tax bill. Donna mentioned our ISO ratings. I contacted our home insurance provider. Our home insurance is going to go up 14% if we were to go to someone like Sullivan. That is more than what it would cost me on my tax bill to keep service with the village. And I am more than willing to pay for that. It sounds like everybody else here is also.
Thank you.
Is that it? Is that the last one?
That's the last one.
Okay. Just by way of bringing everybody up to date here, I thought I could put together a little something. Well, I didn't think I would. I think I got told to, but anyway. Anyhow, just by way of letting you know where we are, how we got to where we are, and a little bit of history. Maybe everybody here knows all of our history, but maybe some people don't. So I'm going to start kind of back at the beginning, way back in 1976. The Palmyra Volunteer Fire and Rescue Department became a legal entity in this community. It was a community, town and village together, and as such, we enjoyed excellent service from this volunteer fire and rescue department. In 2003, recognizing the benefits of shared equipment and shared staff, plans began between the Village of Eagle, the Town of Eagle, the Village of Palmyra, and the Town of Palmyra to form a joint district with equal representation from each of the 4 municipalities involved. That would have been a district with a board that governed it. However, soon after these plans began, the Village of Palmyra decided that having only 1/4 representation on a board that would be governing the organization was not, they didn't feel like that was what they wanted to do, and they pulled out of the plans to consolidate. So at that point, the entire plan was dropped. The Palmyra Volunteer Department continued as usual until about 2011. In Wisconsin, just a few things that I found out since we've been doing some research. Only towns are required to provide EMS protection. Cities and villages have no requirement at all to provide that. And villages and cities above a certain population are only those are required to provide fire protection. So the Palmyra Village is not required to provide fire or EMS protection. The town is. And I don't know how this happened through the legislature, but that's the way the laws are written. In 2011, the village board decided they wanted to have complete control of the volunteer department, and they pulled out of the agreement that governed the existing volunteer department. This left the town in the position of having to scramble to provide the statutorily required fire and EMS protection. And the decision was made to contract with the village for that protection. They did this via the 2012 contract. And from looking at things, the contract, the town was kind of between a rock and a hard spot, really, and that contract maybe wasn't in the very best interest of the town, but it was what it was. So for the past 10 years, this has been the contract under which the town has received services. For the first several years, the service provided by the village was of very questionable quality, and I don't think anybody in the village would even argue about that. Neighboring departments were responding to an inordinate number of calls when the village had no available staff, and they were beginning to get tired of the situation. And it was not until the village was able to hire James Small that things began to improve. Chief Small has managed to salvage a totally failed department, and under his direction, the service has definitely improved. Nobody here tonight is criticizing James Small or any of the employees or any of the volunteers of the village fire and EMS department. You want to talk in here, Al?
Sure. I'm just going to give a summary of kind of the legal position that the town finds itself in right now. As Winona indicated, there was a contract that was struck between the town and the village starting in 2012. So that went on for 10 years. Started January 1st of 2012, expired, or was scheduled to expire December 31st of 2021. And among other things, that contract would automatically renew unless either side, the town or the village, gave a 1-year notice, written notice, saying that they wanted to terminate the contract. And that didn't happen. Neither the town nor the village provided a 1-year written notice, so as a result, the contract renewed. It automatically renewed for another 10 years, starting 2022 and scheduled to end at the end of 2031. However, there's still a provision in there that says either side can terminate if they give a 1-year notice. So that's what happened. The village gave a notice on, I think it was December 21st of 2021, saying that they're going to terminate the contract, which they can do. That means that our current contract expires at the end of this year, December 31st of 2022. And of course, that leads us to the issue that's before the board and everyone else here. What do we do? Where do we go next? Whether we go back to the village or not. The rate that the village has submitted has been almost exactly double the rate of what we paid last year in 2021. Fortunately, we don't have to pay it this year for 2022 because the village missed a deadline. If the village wanted to increase their annual fee, they had to notify us, the town, by October 1st of 2021. They didn't, they missed the deadline, and accordingly, we've notified the village that we're going to pay based on the 2021 rates, which is a good deal for the town. So we are paying based on the 2021 rates. We've paid our first quarterly payment that was due at the beginning of this year. We'll make our remaining quarterly payments with the full understanding that we have to negotiate a new contract. However, we did receive a notice from the village telling us that they expected us to pay almost double the rate that we were scheduled to pay. We have responded referencing the current agreement. We've made our payment. They haven't cashed it yet, to my knowledge.
Not the last time, no.
No, so, don't know exactly what they're planning to do with that $27,000 check that they've been paid. However, we are in compliance with the existing contract. So, that's the legal status of the negotiations. I think Winona's gonna talk a little bit more about the kind of the difficulty that we've had negotiating with the village and why we are looking elsewhere.
There's been a lot said about a new contract between the town and the village. Late last year, in September, I suppose, the village created a draft contract, which they later insisted the town must sign. However, they never presented it to the town according to the requirements of the existing contract. Instead, a village board member and someone else, I still don't know who it was, drove out to my place and gave my grandson an envelope with a request to give it to me. He left it, he did, when I got home, he said, "Hey, I got this envelope for you." An old lady, which I don't think she'd like to hear that, and some other guy stopped by and dropped it off for you. And then I must really mention if she's old, so. Anyway, then I got a telephone call from the village board member. I had a message saying that they had left an envelope with my grandson and it was a proposed contract with some, quote, additional stuff. I assumed that that meant that they were attempting to negotiate a contract. I took that to the town fire and EMS committee for their perusal. The fire and EMS committee read the draft contract, made financial and text changes, and sent those changes to the village, expecting this to be the beginning of negotiations. Soon after, the village board held a special meeting. They invited me to come to the village board meeting. It was done in closed session. And at that meeting, one of the village board members told me that there would be no negotiations. This contract that was left at my house was meant to be a take it or leave it contract. And it was not only, I mean, we could talk about the price, but there were text things in there that I don't think that in good conscience we should have signed. One of the clauses in that proposed contract alleviates the village of any responsibility if they can't provide service. And there's another one that requires the village to provide services to the town at the same level as those provided to the village. Well, since the village is not legally required to provide those services, and they would not bear any legal burden if they couldn't, so that it's for some terrible reason, and it would be unfortunate and terrible, they became unable to provide contracted services. Things like lack of staff, that was one of the things that they said. The town would be in a terrible situation. We'd have a legal problem on our hands, besides the moral and ethical problem of not being able to provide a service, because we can't just all of a sudden go get somebody else to help us out. So another sticking point was the fact that the contract would have resulted in the town paying $185 per resident, one of the highest in the state, while village residents paid $121 per resident. The town receives approximately a third of the village fire and EMS services, and the village receives about 2/3. So the town fire and EMS committee began exploring other options for fire and EMS service. We've learned a lot, excuse me, in a few short months, the most important thing being that today's small, standalone departments simply aren't very viable. This is the situation all over Wisconsin and indeed all over the nation. Staffing is the critical issue today. So consolidation allows for shared staff and shared equipment. You're going to have to read the rest of this from me, Al.
No, they re- yeah,
Excuse me.
These talks all involve having staff and equipment either in or near the village. At this point, we are considering possible sites, and since these sites involve negotiations, they are not public at this time. That brings me to a much misunderstood issue of something being called ISO. ISO stands for Insurance Services Office, and it is a for-profit company owned by Verisk that has created a fire suppression rating schedule to create a fire score, otherwise known as a public protection classification. This score indicates how well protected your community is by the fire department. Since there are various things considered when arriving at this rating score, a score can change by various things in the community. Water supply is a large factor in arriving at the score, so a department in a community with fire hydrants may score better than one in a community without fire hydrants. If the town were to contract with a different district or department, their ISO rating might change depending on the resources in our own community. Some insurance companies purchase this information and use the ISO rating to different degrees when determining fire insurance rates, but not all do. State Farm, for one, does not use the ISO ratings at all. Most of us have policies that cover losses other than fire, and things like storm damage rates would not be affected by these ISO ratings. We have a couple of links in our website with information on this subject, and there are some print copies here. If you have questions about your insurance rates and how your insurance policy and rates are affected by ISO ratings, the person you should speak with is your own insurance company representative. Okay. All right.
Got a phone in my throat.
Yeah. I think you took a lot of something.
So, I guess that's it. Were you going to say something about the website?
Yeah, I think, because if we are doing negotiations or anything, and we probably will potentially try to keep people informed with it, with information on the website, but we won't be formally answering any more questions. The clerk has a couple of elections coming up and she's busy, and we think that potentially there'll be questions asked that we can't answer anyhow. So we will try to keep the public informed with the website as much as we can.
Could you please let us know what criteria you're using to compare the options you're looking at?
Not this time.
Not at this moment, but as you are going to keep us informed, so that we know the criteria that's being discussed.
It's fair enough.
And can't you have question and answer or some informational meetings like Donna said earlier, rather than just, well, we're just gonna hold up and go into a bunch of closed session meetings, see you later. You know, let's keep this transparent to people as much as you can, please.
Or at least ask the constituency what they want, what's important to them. You're negotiating, but you haven't asked us what you want.
You could probably go through most of this town and they probably don't even know what's going on.
A lot of the problem is not just the price, but it's the contract, the non-negotiable contract. We have nothing to say, and it's probably would have been difficult to sign even if there wasn't that rate increase. With no input, nothing to say about it, it's very difficult. And the problem is everything is not negotiable, so it's a problem.
Okay, but I'm
They've
not
never
asking about
actually
that.
given us a contract. All they did, we got a letter from the village president saying that if we did not sign the enclosed contract, they would give us 365 days notice, and there was no contract enclosed.
So that's a clerical error that's easily rectified, don't you think?
No,
Should be.
You can't ask for what happened to the contract?
I have a question of clarification.
Yeah. Do you guys really want to get into question and answer?
No, we have public comments.
No, is the village operating as a contractor, similar to your highway services and your garbage services? And those services are like contractors, correct? You hire them.
Contractor like the garbage.
Okay, if they're a contractor, they have to tell you what they're gonna provide and offer you a contract. And if you don't wanna buy it, you don't have to.
Correct.
What are your other options? That's what you should be giving us.
What we're looking at. Really,
There don't appear to be very many.
I'd just like to say that it came to my attention that there's gonna be some sort of mediation existing between the town and the village.
Hasn't come to
If
our
I'm
notice.
mistaken, my apologies, but I would certainly applaud that because we're all in this together, right?
yep, we are.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Been moving second to adjourn, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? No, motion carried. Meeting's adjourned.